Awesome, hello, I'm Jonny, so I'm the TA lead at Answer Digital. I work for an employee-owned software consultancy based in Leeds. I've been in recruitment for about 12 years now, and one of the things I'm really positive, really passionate about is trying to improve. I can hear, I'm stood near the sound. Is that alright? One of the things I'm really passionate about is trying to improve how companies recruit. I think there's so much to be said for all the great stuff organisations do around inclusion and champion equity and all that great stuff that TA people do, but I think often one of the biggest challenges we have as TA professionals is that great work can be set up for failure when it's in a recruitment process that's not designed for us to succeed. This title is a little bit misleading. There's a couple of spreadsheets, but nothing too crazy. But rather than promise like a secret solution or some one answer to fix everything, I just wanted to talk about a challenge we've had around trying to make our process a bit more flexible and hire better people, some of the pain points, the frustrations, and some of the lessons we learned, and hopefully take a bit of insight from that and hopefully make some positive changes where you work. Slido for questions. So I guess first off, I wanted to kind of get people to think about recruitment data. Now I imagine most people use recruitment data or use data in their roles, but I really wanted to think about how we use it. I'd say most of the time, most recruiters, me included, we often use data to try and justify our position to the wider business, trying to convince hiring managers of the work we do. It can be stuff like, what's the return on investment? What are our suppliers doing? What's our job boards providing? What's our time to hire? What are we actually doing rather than just sitting on LinkedIn? What are we providing as a service? What's our agency spend? Or that question that I really hate is, why haven't we got CVs? Why haven't we got them? And I think often we never ask ourselves, how can we do stuff better? How can we recruit better? The couple of examples, they're just from data that was taken from our ATS over the last 12 months. For organisations that maybe hire a lot more volume, you can use a random sample, you can compare teams that hire well, that hire don't. But I think the key with all of this is to just look at the data and try and ask, what can we improve? What can we do differently? So on face value, our recruitment data might look brilliant. We can certainly present to a wider business that everything is working, everything's fine. We've got a pretty good diversity split, our agency spend's fairly low. We've got a pretty good acceptance rate, and we could certainly, like I said, present this to keep hiring managers and stakeholders happy, but it doesn't really give a full picture of what our recruitment's like. So we literally took a quick pivot table, took all the data in an Excel spreadsheet, put it across columns with interview stages, rows with job titles, and candidate ID being the unique value. Now ideally, you want the biggest drop-off in recruitment process to be between applications and screening, with a slow tail off through the rest of the process. I know HR best practice talks about the 5-3-1 method, 5-3-1 ratio, but ultimately as long as you've kind of got a steady drop off throughout the process, it's nothing to be worried about. And that's a snapshot of 4 roles that our recruitment data look like. Obviously, a lot of the data at the bottom omits certain things that maybe in a highlight reel we presented to hiring managers we wouldn't necessarily show. So what did the data show us? 17 people, so almost 20% of people who went through our interview process withdrew. And whilst you can kind of argue, maybe salaries, maybe we weren't the right business, we never really got to a point where we could find that out, and the majority of people we missed out on was simply because we couldn't act quick enough. Now, looking at this, what if the first person that we drew from the delivery lead role was the perfect candidate and we would have hired them straight away? Thinking about that, thinking of all the time, the effort, the business cost we've wasted going through all the interviews, all the screening calls, everything we do as TA professionals, not to mention the cost impact of having someone in a role much quicker. I think it's easy when recruitment demand is really high to have a real delivery-focused, immediate-focused attitude and kind of focus on, we need to fill roles, that's our job. But I think thinking of the bigger picture stuff like this and trying to address hidden inefficiencies actually makes our job easier. If I'd filled that role weeks or months beforehand, I could move on to something else, I could do something else. And often when our demand is crazy busy and we've got so much to do, we kind of miss out on that. So I'm aware I just did 2 data tables and I probably lost the majority of the room, so I thought, not quite the Giphy standard of your presentation, Josh, but a couple of memes to try and bring back engagement. Now, I'm hoping this kind of gets an emotional response from people of where your recruitment process sits. I've worked in environments where it's like the Wild West, constantly fighting fires. You'll have someone give you a CV and say, you know, I've interviewed that person, they need to start Monday, do the contract, and you start there thinking, what? And then I've also worked in environments where there's loads of red tape, loads of process, loads of approvals, and often it becomes a real challenge just trying to do our job and hire people. Now, I would argue as TA professionals, we need to have something that sits in the middle that can flex either side of this scale. Thinking about what some candidates want, some people do want speed. If you've got someone who's been made redundant, who's actively looking, they're interviewing at loads of companies, they might not want to go through 5 or 6 interview stages. But, you know, there's loads of work that companies do, like tech returners, around kind of getting people into tech getting women into tech who have had kind of time out from childcare, and expecting someone who's got childcare commitments, whether that's, you know, whatever parent that might be, to do 5, 6 interviews. It's really difficult, and I would argue, are we kind of giving those people the best chance to succeed in a process where they've got to do, you know, a lot of hoops to jump through? And on the other extreme, we've got people who prefer a slow process. They might not be actively looking, they might want to meet as many people face to face, they might want more chance to prepare, they might be happy to do interviews. There's loads of data around kind of neurodiversity and having people from neurodivergent backgrounds wanting to prepare more and be invested in that process. And if we're going to make them do 1 stage, it's really quick turnaround. Are we really giving them the best platform to succeed? So like I said, I think having a process that can flex either side for the right people rather than expecting a fixed approach that our candidates have to bend around is the best way to hire. So once we acknowledged we wanted to improve speed, I think the next step for us was to try and map out every stage of our process. That was mainly so we could look at where we could save time, what we could do different, things we could change. So this is a Miro board. It's just about our current recruitment process. Hopefully it looks quite similar to what most people are familiar with. I think for us, mapping out each stage allowed us to kind of ask that question and challenge stuff like, why do we do this way? What's the point? Why is it needed? We've been on a real journey the last kind of 6 months or so with hiring managers, a lot of them expecting candidates to do 2 stages face to face. And when we challenged that and asked why, they said, well, I want to meet people, you know, if they're joining our team or our capability, I want to meet them and see what they're like. And actually, if you just booked in a half-hour coffee after that final interview, do you really need to do that first stage face to face? And we've kind of taken hiring managers on that journey where actually they've done the first stage kind of remotely, they're comfortable with it, they grab an informal coffee after that final interview, and it's just a much more flexible process for people who can't do 2 stages in an office. So once we mapped out our process, we asked ourselves, what's the purpose? Why do we do it? At each stage, we asked, what does this achieve? Do we really need it? I've worked in businesses before where the 2-stage interview was identical, it was the same thing. And essentially, the same interview, the reason they did it was to try and catch bad hires or avoid hiring the wrong person. And it was there just to mask inefficiencies in interviewing, and providing hiring managers with training around interviewing and guidance and showing them how to interview properly meant they didn't need that and they were comfortable doing 1 interview. So for us, our answer, our 2 stages are quite well defined, and this might look familiar with some people. The first stage is really technically driven. There's like a tech test involved. It's all around asking, can people do the job? Are they able to work with the technology we work with? And the second stage is much more kind of culture and value driven, understanding culture fit, understanding our ways of working, our values, and I think making sure there's a lot of transparency that as a business we're right for them as the other way around. So with that in mind, we couldn't really condense them, or else it would be like a 6-hour interview, a 4 or 6-hour interview, and just that sounds awful. So the next question we asked, can we condense them? Can we combine them? Simple, right? At this point, I'd love to say we finished it all works well, but it didn't at all. There was a ton of pressure and resistance from the business. I got loads of kind of negative feedback. The second stage involved a DISC assessment, and we pay for that. So if we're doing that for every candidate, that's going to cost loads. Our candidates in the final interview, they meet with our directors, so asking our board to take out an hour of their time every time, there's a cost involved. The reputational damage, if we have all our board meeting all these interviews and not many of them kind of get through to an offer stage, does that make us look bad? Doesn't give people a chance to wash up properly. We're hiring people, it's not broken, why change stuff? These are all examples of the feedback we got back. Now, moving forward, I remember seeing and this isn't even recruitment related, I remember seeing a talk Reverend Richard Coles did a few years ago around challenging adversity and mindset. He's a devout Christian, but he's also gay, and he challenged kind of that. How do you deal with people who have different views to you? And he comes up with the phrase, finding the least creepy explanation. And when people behave in a way that's maybe not how you feel, try and empathise with people, find the least creepy way. I think often with hiring managers, when they don't want to change something, it's not because they don't want to, they're not bothered, they're not interested, it's often because they don't want to change it, they might be scared of change, they might think, well, it works, what's the risk of potentially hiring bad people? And I think it's our job as TA partners to educate stakeholders and take them on that journey and showing them the benefits of change. It can be quite easy to come up with the list before answers to that. I don't necessarily think that addresses the emotional connection to change. So often using data, kind of highlighting the benefits, what can we get out of it, is a really good way of removing a lot of that emotion. If you still feel like you're kind of not getting where you'd like to be and you still meet resistance, try and open a dialogue and understand where the hiring community are coming from. Try and put their concerns at ease. Try and find a compromise. It might be that the way you want to do it doesn't quite fit with the way they work as a TA function, the hiring community. It might be you need to put compromises in place to kind of get them on board. And I think finally, just change isn't permanent. That reassurance that, let's try it, let's see if it works. If it doesn't, if I've messed up and this is all wrong, it's fine, we'll go back to how things were. It's not permanent. So why did we want to change? We were hiring, we had that really great highlight reel, and these are the main reasons why we wanted to change our recruitment process. So I think first of all, we hire the best people. I think there's loads of competition. Many of them, I work with businesses in this room, I would class as competition. When there's so much competition for tech talent and it's an all-time high, I think the ability to move much quicker is a massive advantage. I think companies spend thousands and thousands on the new tool, the new trick, the new kind of supplier, the new thing, but if we can change something that makes us hire quicker and it doesn't really cost, comparatively that much, why wouldn't we try it? More inclusive, accessing a more diverse pool of candidates. I think as organisational culture shifts from being flexible, there's talk of hybrid working, remote, flexible hours, working around people's lifestyle. That expectation that our recruitment process is fixed and people should bend around that, I think that's a mindset that's slowly dying. I think organisations that can bend processes around the best candidates have the best chance of keeping people engaged. Ultimately, recruit quicker. All the performance and cost-saving benefits of having people in a business quicker. Time-billing companies, you could even look at risk revenue, projects delivered quicker, all that stuff. There's a massive cost involved in hiring people in a business much quicker. It's a better experience for candidates, so candidates will feel more valued if they can see organisations be more flexible around them, they'll be more bought in, more engaged. You're giving candidates a better platform to succeed. And I think thinking about this, I kind of find myself looking back at people that we've maybe interviewed in companies I've worked for before and thinking, how many times were candidates not successful in a role, not because they couldn't do the job or because they weren't right for the business, but because our recruitment process didn't set them up for success. It might be we dragged them in for another interview face to face and they were worried about their manager thinking they've had 5 dentist appointments in a week, or they were stressed about picking the kids up, or all that stuff. It's like how many times have we set candidates up to not have a platform to succeed? And ultimately it makes our business look better, both kind of with candidates in the market, all that stuff. It makes us look better if we can hire people quicker. I think having process for process sake, it's not a good reputation to have. If someone's interviewed and they kind of go away and talk to their friends and say, oh, I interviewed that company and they made me do however many interviews, it's just not good. So how do we articulate the benefits best to the business? I think as TA professionals, it's our job to understand the audience we're dealing with and try and articulate the information in a way that resonates best with them. So some people want to see numbers in tables. Others want to see the tools they're familiar with, the tools they use, and often some people are just really commercially driven and want to see it in pounds and pennies. And I think understanding the best way to articulate all this stuff is the best way to get engagement from our hiring community and making sure they're bought in. Because if they're not, if they kind of think we're just recruiters going wild, doing whatever we want, and they're not interested, it's never going to work. We need to get them bought in, we need to get them on that journey with us and really driving change. So this is an example of how we try to change it across our BAs and delivery team. We use Miro, which is a process mapping tool that they love. It's all about the sticky notes, throwing them on there and all that. We use that as a tool to try and articulate, well, here's what we're saving, here's what we're doing. And we felt like that was the best way to get their engagement. Around compromise. Now, ultimately, it's not our job to tell businesses what's best for them. Like I said, we're there to provide insight, to try and partner, to guide and advise. We need them bought in. If we're not, and we're constantly getting friction and kind of resistance with our hiring managers, it's not going to work. Change isn't going to work. So I looked at the hesitation our hiring managers had, and we put together a criteria of when we would be flexible. You know, for us, flexibility isn't around completely moving the goalposts and changing everything. It's around having a different approach and putting guidelines in place for when we knew we could use it. To try and reduce risks, we said, is the candidate a referral? Is it a known quantity? Do they work for a company we know, we're familiar with? Do we know the technology they use, the work they do? Are we comfortable that their expectations match ours? That's not just salary, so it's not just about money, it's making sure they know our business, we talk about our values, they're engaged, they're not just, interviewing with 9-10 different companies that are interested in us. And ultimately, the final question being, will we miss out if we don't act on them now? Is this person been made redundant? Are we going to lose them at the end of the week? If we don't, if we can act quick and we can avoid that, then perfect. And ultimately, by giving the final decision to our cap leads in the business and sort of putting this information to them and saying, I have a great person, we need to flex, we need to change things. If we don't, we'll miss out. Are you happy? Are you comfortable? We got buy-in and reassurance that they're still in charge. They're still, we're not making decisions without their buy-in. It's ultimately up to them. There might be times where they say, no, I'm not, and we don't flex. We miss out on that person, but then you've kind of got that accountability to say, this is why we offered that advice. But by giving them the power and the ultimate decision, it kind of feels like we're not just, going rogue. So this is the end results. You can see there's not a massive amount of changes from the stuff at the top. A high level amount, it's not marginally better. I think the main thing, most importantly for us, in the same number of roles, where before we had 7 dropouts, we had 2. The feedback was really positive on our recruitment process, both from people in the business thinking we could turn things around much quicker, but candidates as well, saying they felt like they were more bought in, they felt valued. And one example, a delivery lead role, we had someone apply on a Tuesday, interview Thursday, we had contracts out before the end of the week, and they started on a Monday. And that's not like a real cringy brag or anything like that, it was more, that would have never been possible before, never at all, with 2 interviews and all the prep that goes in. We turned it around quicker, and the feedback on that's been amazing in the business. I'm thinking selfishly, turning a role in 4 days, that would have probably taken me weeks, potentially months to fill. It makes me a much better recruiter. I can move on, do other stuff, get involved in other projects, do more stuff, invest my time, rather than kind of doing stuff for the sake of the process. So in terms of lessons learned and stuff we took away, the first one being make sure that your data is accurate. The best way to take insight and to make any decision is to make sure that the data you've got is accurate. I would caveat that. I think it's way more important to have a broad set of data rather than having 5, really detailed data sets. It's much more important to have, say, 25, 50, or 100 where you can take insight from. The next would be to make time to look back retrospectively. I know Josh kind of touched upon it. I think as kind of recruitment people, it's so easy to focus on fighting fires and doing the delivery stuff now and really focusing on kind of filling roles. But often, how often do we sit back and think, in 3, 6, 12 months, look back and think of how we can improve and what we can do. Review data without bias or predisposition. So don't go in with this with, that first interview we did is useless, let's get rid of that. let the data show you where the issues are, they'll show you where the blockers are and what problems you've got in your process. Arguably, probably most importantly, don't get disheartened by resistance. I think change is really difficult for some people. Often hiring managers don't understand kind of our world, and we sit on LinkedIn all day and we just shake a tree and CVs fall out. So it's understandable that they're going to find change difficult, and I think for us, don't be disheartened from that. Take hiring managers on the journey, educate them, whether it's with data or the benefits. I wouldn't take resistance as the first hurdle. Now, as recruiters, we often kind of take our knowledge for granted. I think educate people on why we want to make changes. You know, they might say, oh, we're hiring people, it's not broken. Well, it might be the case, but we can do things a lot better. Take them on that journey and kind of let them understand what we need to do to feel confident in change. And lastly, I think if we see a way to make things better, then absolutely do it. We're not just there to put bums on seats and fill roles and deliver. We're subject matter experts in recruitment. It's our job to provide insight and guidance. If there's ways we can make things better for our business, then we should absolutely be empowered to do it. And that is it. Thank you for your time. I hope I made a talk about data somewhat engaging. Any questions? I don't have the Slido link, so if there's any questions, No, not at all. So I think part of this is kind of putting the question onto candidates and asking what do they want to do, and they will tell you. There have been instances where I've said, do you want to rush this? And not necessarily rush it, but we can kind of combine things and speed the process up. And they've said, no, I want to take my time. I want to meet people. I want to get more of a feel for the business. I think this is just taking the feedback you get from candidates and shaping what their journey looks like, and that should be individual rather than everyone has to do 2 interviews, both of them are face to face, kind of flexing it around what they want. No, so I think it's making sure the criteria of your interview process stays the same. So you're not getting rid of one thing, you're just condensing stuff. So you look at what does each interview, what's the purpose, and making sure whatever you change, those criteria are still there. So I think there's definitely been times where hiring managers have kind of said, oh, we don't want to change, and then we've missed out on people, and you kind of got that, well, that's not told you so, like, this is why we want to do stuff. But I think as long as the same assessment criteria and the same outcomes and deliverables are there, it doesn't matter however you flex it, as long as that's important. One more question. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask, how do you track the data without taking up all the time?
Yeah, so a lot of ATSs have reporting and all this stuff in, and that's amazing. Some don't, and it can be a little manual. I think that's probably why it's not done on a day-to-day basis. You sit back and make a conscious effort and go, I'm going to book an hour out, I'm going to see what our hiring data look like for the last 6 months. That's certainly the case for us. The ATS we use, the reporting is awful, honestly, it's so bad. So we pulled it all into an Excel and just literally did a pivot table, and then just made sense of that. It can be quite manual, and you don't want to spend all the time doing that. It's not very fun.
So you mentioned about like the data showing a story, and that's really great. I think we've had a lot of conversations about being more data driven and X design, and how do you obviously your data shows you a picture, but it's important to also know the context behind that. So for one role, like the time to hire might be significantly higher, but like how do you take that into consideration when you're doing things like that?
Absolutely. So I think it's really good to get a lot of context externally. So you're going to have a time to hire for a lead software engineer is going to be much higher than a mid-level BA. So I think often using resources that agencies provide around what the kind of average market time to hire is really good. I think often using data to get a high-level overview and then going in and saying, right, well, we had 7 dropouts there, let's look into that role and see why, and look from there, rather than just going off the data. That shows you where the anomalies are, and you can deep dive into that and say, oh, okay, actually it was fine, we had a few dropouts, but people didn't want to work for us, they didn't like the feedback or anything like that. I think, it's often a challenge. You kind of got to take a few things both internally and externally. Cool, thank you.